Welcome to Season 5 of the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom, where we talk with enterprise and technology platform leaders about the people, processes, and platforms that make marketing and customer experience successful, scalable, and sustainable. This is what creates an Agile brand. I'm your host, Greg Kihlstrom, advisor and consultant for Fortune 1000 marketing and CX leaders and teams as principal and chief strategist at GK5A, and best-selling author, keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and Agile certified coach. The Agile Brand podcast is brought to you by TEKsystems, an industry leader in full-stack technology services, talent services, and real-world application. For more information, go to teksystems.com. To sign up for the Agile Brand newsletter and get the latest insights and articles on marketing technology and CX, or to purchase a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, go to gregkihlstrom.com. You can also find all my books on Amazon and other retailers. And now on to the show. Today we're going to talk about in-game advertising and how brands are utilizing this tactic to great effect, all while strategizing amid growing efforts to implement global data privacy policies. To help me discuss this topic, I'd like to welcome Jared Lansky, SVP of Partnerships at MediaMath. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about this topic with you. Why don't we get started, though, by you giving a little background on yourself, as well as what you're currently doing at MediaMath.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Senior Vice President of Partnerships at MediaMath. For those that might not be familiar, MediaMath is a demand-side platform or a platform that lets advertisers buy across really any channel that can be purchased digitally. So that's television, audio, websites, out-of-home billboards, and what we're going to be talking about today, in-games. So the partnership role is really interesting because I get to interact with all the different companies that are integrated into our platform. And that can be different supply partners or data partners or technology partners. So having a really good view about all the new companies, startups that are bringing values to advertisers and how they fit into the broader ecosystem. In general, a little bit more about myself. Have done a host of startups through the years. One of those startups got acquired by Google, where I spent about 4 years managing their ad exchange, and joined MediaMath about 2 years ago.
Great. Well, yeah, let's get started here, and let's start with a little overview and background on in-game advertising for those that may be a little less familiar with some of this. So, how would you define what exactly is in-game advertising, and what are the types of in-game advertising that are available?
At a basic level, in-game advertising is the integrations of ads within games. To break that down a bit further, there are static advertising opportunities within games. In those scenarios, the ads are considered at time of game development. So it's published with the advertiser's message already incorporated into the game. And then what we're seeing more of today is dynamic in-game opportunities. So the game has been published, but there's still the opportunity to insert ads thereafter once the game is actually published. And if we even go break that down a bit further, within the game, there is intrinsic ads. So these are the ads that are actually part of gameplay. And if you think of playing hockey through a game, around the sides of the hockey rink, there might be advertisements. In the past, those advertisements were made up or fictitious. Now, today, we can actually insert real advertisements into those games.
Yeah, nice.
Outside of the intrinsic games, they're what we call game adjacent. So this might be a mobile game that you are playing on your phone, and then on the bottom of the screen, you might see a banner. So those are labeled game adjacent.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So lots of options there, and some sounds like some more dynamic than others as well. So kind of a broad question here, but how can brands leverage in-game advertising to basically to create a more immersive experience, as opposed to maybe a website which has a fairly static experience. In-game advertising offers pretty interactive play. So, how can brands really take advantage of this for target audiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of innovation all happens and really the last, let's say, 18 months. So ads have been accompanying games for a while now, especially on mobile games. But as I mentioned earlier, those are more ad adjacent. So you have a large audience. You can reach that audience by having the banner ad that's next to the game. But the innovation really comes with those intrinsic ads, and that's where you can get that immersive environment. So whether it's a driving game or if it's a kind of a first-person shooter where you're navigating a map and actually walking across different environments, the ads, the billboards that are displayed in those games can be inserted with ads in a near real-time capacity. So it affords this opportunity to have, be completely consumed in the game, have a lot of attention focusing on the game, but still in your periphery, having these ads that are placed. And we're seeing some really novel placements that are happening, and there's standardization, which has really helped the space pick up momentum and see a lot more business.
Yeah, and so to kind of follow on that, you mentioned the intrinsic ads kind of being seamlessly worked into the games. How is this done well without disrupting narrative, disrupting game design, or maybe even compromising intellectual property?
So outside of the examples I just gave, which again, they're pretty passive, right? When
Yeah.
you're driving your car and you see the billboards on the side, in the past, it was a fictitious ad. Now it's a real ad, but that doesn't really hurt the user experience.
Yeah.
But outside of that, there's also rewarded video, which, it could be polarizing, but ultimately it's part of the gameplay. So you're at some level and you need to get to the next step. As part of the next step, you might have to watch a video or interact with an ad. So it is absolutely part of the storyline of the game. It does kind of take you away from that gameplay, but at the end of the day, it is part of the game. And to be able to progress, you need to be able to take that action.
Yeah.
I also want to mention that there's audio ads that we're starting to see in game as well. So similar to the rewarded video where it's part of the gameplay, but the benefit of the audio ad, instead of having to watch a video, you'll initiate an audio ad that will play in the background while you're playing the game. So you're still stopping your current activity. You have to go through the step to engage with the ad, but it's a little less intrusive because you can continue playing the game without having to wait for that video or interact with the ad while having the audio work in the background.
Yeah, it's like if it's a car driving game, it's like listening to the radio in the car or something like that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, nice. So while consumers generally want more personalized content and experiences, and I would even say the ads, the fact that you can tailor those and that they are dynamic. I mean, I think it's more rewarding to have a dynamic ad than either a static ad or a generic ad or something like that. But while consumers want this stuff, there are some trade-offs as far as the brands that are serving these ads, the games. They need to collect data about those consumers, and so it requires data being sent to advertisers and brands in order to get those personalized recommendations. So how do current consumer data privacy laws, which obviously vary widely from locale to locale, but how do they affect in-game advertising?
Yeah, the privacy laws are impacting every aspect of online advertising or digital advertising. And really what it comes down to is you need to be transparent with your consumer. There needs to be a fair value exchange. And furthermore, understanding what the advertiser is going to be doing with the data and give that consumer the ability to manage that data. right? There is value being provided in these games, but the problem happens when all of this is happening behind the scenes. Bring it out into the open, transparently share what data you're going to be collecting, and then ultimately giving that user the ability to manage it. On top of that, you really want to minimize the data, right? Just because the data is there to be collected doesn't necessarily mean you have to collect it or should collect it. Yeah. And with in-games in particular, the way they are structured, they don't afford the same liberties as a traditional website. For example, cookies can't be dropped in many of the in-game environments. So as a result, we're seeing more upper or mid-funnel targeting tactics take place. Think of kind of branding initiatives. So not relying on really kind of hyper-targeting, but targeting more on the genre of the game, right? So if you are advertising to sports enthusiasts, it's enough to target games that are baseball, hockey, football, to have that proximity to your audience segment. And then what's also adding to that trend is that in many in-game environments, the ads themselves aren't clickable. So you're not going to advertise in a game to sell a widget right there on that one transaction, but rather you're presenting the brand, you're just improving the recognition of that brand, and then there can be other tactics layered on thereafter to actually try to complete the transaction. But the in-games opportunity is really more of a branding vehicle, and as a result, are in a better position with respect to privacy and compliance.
Before we continue, I'd like to make sure you're aware of the upcoming CXPS 2023 conference, May 8 through 11, 2023 in Durham, North Carolina. CXPS is a great CX event focused on professional services firms that want to know how to take the next steps to make their firm successful in integrating client experience with their firm's strategic initiatives. To learn more and register for the conference, go to clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference. That's clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference. And you can register with the code AGILE200, that's AGILE 200, for $200 off your tickets. You can hear from top professional services executives and CX thought leaders like myself through a combination of keynotes, breakout sessions, workshops, and panel discussions. Make sure to register at clientexperience.org/CXPS-conference with the code AGILE200 for $200 off your tickets. Now let's get back to the show. You've mentioned the concept of, if they're going to be collecting data, and even though it may be different than collecting web data or mobile app data in general or something, they're going to be collecting some of that data. But how do you see the value exchange? Like, how have you seen the value exchange done well as far as, providing a benefit?
It relies heavily on the game publisher themselves. And the reason I say that is the game often requires a registration of some point, whether you're creating your username, entering your age, and just general login credentials. So at that point of registration is really a good opportunity to have that discussion with the end user, right? You're getting access to this game in exchange that we also work with advertisers. Advertisers might do X, Y, and Z, and giving them the choice to say, yep, I'm okay with that, or no, I'm not, but maybe somewhere in the middle I'm okay with. And so the more sophisticated publishers are using third-party solutions, consent management platforms, to really manage that conversation in a productive way. Beyond that, there's also the opportunity to interact with the end user as an advertiser through such formats as that rewarded video, right? There's no clear example of value exchange when you're presented right there at the moment of gameplay to say, we can give you another skin or we can upgrade your car, But in exchange, you need to interact with this ad. And by the way, these are the different data points that we will be collecting. Again, is this okay? Yes, no, and being able to capture consent and really express what that advertiser is going to be doing and what data they are collecting.
Yeah. And so from an advertiser standpoint, I mean, as we talked about at the top of the show, there's a lot of options here. There's, several different ways. How does a brand really decide what's going to work best for them? Which methods, or are there certain methods or types of ads that work a little bit better for different types of desired effects or things like that?
Yeah, in-game advertising is still relatively new. So we're seeing a lot of testing from advertisers to figure out what's going to work best based on the goals that they're looking for, or their KPIs. So we see a lot of cases where all the different formats are tested and then deciding based on their goal objective, which one is going to work best for them. So you have branding, which is you just want to associate and get your brands associated with a particular game that represents a typical audience. And then you can go all the way further down the funnel where you have more of an ad adjacent, where you have a traditional banner ad, where you can generate a click and ultimately drive a conversion. So for some advertisers, it's a mix of all of them. For others, they're picking and choosing certain placements within that funnel that are going to provide value to them. But it's, ultimately the games represent a huge audience. I mean, everyone is playing games, and it's not just teens in the basement playing shooting games. The latest that have females actually over-indexing over males, especially with casual games. So it's new. There's a lot of options, needs to be figured out. In terms of the amount of people, the amount of time being spent on games relative to the ads, the revenue generated from ads, it's completely under indexed. Right. Yeah. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth. I think there's a plethora of options. I still think we'll see some continued innovation in terms of what type of formats work really well. The intrinsic ads have been a huge step forward, but still, when you have the static type of ad placement where the whole game is incorporated around the idea of an advertisement, that's kind of the marquee experience. But with respect to MediaMath and how we operate, everything we do is programmatic. So it is decisioning that's happening at the time of the ad opportunity. So I see those worlds colliding between the advantages of static and the efficiencies of programmatic, and more capabilities coming together as a result.
Yeah. Definitely sounds like exciting things ahead. And so along those lines, first of all, thanks so much for joining. I've got, just one last question before we wrap up here. As you mentioned, MediaMath, definitely a leading advertising technology platform, and a lot of exciting stuff here. What do you see on the horizon, just given kind of your purview on things? What's on the horizon regarding ad tech that brands should be keeping in mind in the months ahead?
Yeah, anyone's familiar with this space, they've heard about the demise of the third-party cookies.
Yeah.
So as a result, right, Apple has already put this in place. Firefox, Brave, and Chrome is slated, I think, at the end of 2024 for the removal of cookies. So as a result, this notion of first-party data has become really valuable, right? You also might have seen this trend with respect to retail media. They sit on a really valuable data source that's not only available for targeting, but also attribution. What I'm particularly excited about, because it taps into the first-party data, but also on the privacy side, is for publishers or retailers or brands that have that first-party data, but they're not so willing to actually use it for targeting. They don't want to release that control. There's the ability today to take that first-party data and use it as a seed audience. So you would work with a clean room or a third party where you can safely provide that data segment just to allow models to be built off of that seed audience. So you're not targeting that data set per se, but you're using that to build models. And the way you can transact against that defined model is contextual. So instead of targeting a cookie or instead of targeting an email address, you have the ability to, create this model of that first party segment and start to map it to websites that user or users similar to that profile have visited. So instead of, again, targeting an actual cookie, you start to get an understanding of what type of websites that user has visited and creating packages of those websites and being able to execute that valuable data set without actually targeting data. So it's really kind of bridge the gap between the fidelity of that targeting while taking into consideration the privacy concerns and the regulations are in place with respect to how you can target to bring the best of both of those together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think the whole clean room, there's been just a lot of movement on that. Do you think some of this is, from where you sit, do you think that brands are moving quickly enough? I mean, as you mentioned, at least as of today, Google's deprecating at the end of 2024. I know that's changed like 20 times in the last 12 months or something, but I'm being a little facetious. But do you think that brands are moving quickly enough to get to first party data, or, are things like data clean rooms and things like that going to help kind of accelerate things towards the end here?
All brands are, or I'll say most brands are discussing, they're aware, they have some strategy, but there's still a lot of scale and opportunities within Chrome when there are cookies.
Yeah.
So not moving fast enough. They are prepared to move fast, but there isn't a reason to do so just yet. Once cookies go away, that's when you'll see things really accelerate. And I'm confident the brands will be in a position to navigate that change, but the impetus to make that change is not quite there yet.
Yeah. That makes sense. Well, again, I'd like to thank Jared Lansky, SVP Partnerships at MediaMath, for joining the show. You can learn more about Jared and MediaMath by following the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening to the Agile Brand with Greg Kihlstrom podcast, brought to you by Tech Systems. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice and leave us a rating so that others can find the show more easily. You can access more episodes of the show at www.gregkihlstrom.com. That's GregKihlstrom.com. To get a copy of my latest book, House of the Customer, visit my website, or you can find it on Amazon or other retailers. The Agile Brand is produced by Missing Link, a Latina-owned, strategy-driven, creatively fueled production co-op. From ideation to creation, they craft human connections through intelligent, engaging, and informative content. Until next time, stay agile.